All right, welcome. Today we are heading south, way south, into one of history's most important and, frankly, most brutal landscapes, the Negev and the Sinai Peninsula. We're going to take a journey into this world of rock, dust, and sun to figure out how on earth it could have shaped the destiny of an entire nation.
So, when you picture this place, don't think of green fields or rolling hills. No, this region is all about what it doesn't have. It's a barren wilderness, just wind-blown soil and riverbeds that are bone dry most of the year. This is the kind of place you try to get through as fast as you can, not a place you'd ever choose to live.
And that right there is the central puzzle, isn't it? If this land is so hostile, so empty, how did it become the very crucible where a national identity was forged? Well, the answer, as we're about to see, is pretty simple. Geography is destiny.
Okay, let's kick things off with our first region, the Negev. You know, the name itself is the perfect place to start. It's this one Hebrew word with a double meaning that basically tells you everything you need to know about this land.
So check this out. The word Negev means south, which makes sense, right? It's south of where most ancient Israelites lived. But it also means dry. And with only about 8 to 12 inches of rain a year, trust me, that's no exaggeration. It's like the land and the language are one.
Now, to really get a handle on the biblical Negev, you got to picture a bow tie. Seriously, it's the best way to think about it. You've got an eastern basin and a western basin, and then smack dab in the middle, right where the knot would be, sits the absolutely crucial city of Beersheba.
Look, in a place this bone dry, geography dictates literally everything. Survival comes down to just two things. First, finding water, and second, controlling the incredibly valuable trade routes that snaked across the land, connecting the east to the Mediterranean. So let's start with the water.
And this is where the wadi becomes your best friend. Most of the year, it's just a dry, rocky riverbed. But when the rains come, maybe miles away up in the hills, these channels suddenly, whoosh, roar to life, carrying that precious water. Knowing where the wadis were was literally a matter of life and death.
The Negev is also home to these absolutely mind-blowing geological formations called makdashim. They look just like impact craters from an asteroid, but they're not. They are these massive, massive bowls just carved out by erosion over millions of years. People call them the small crater, the large crater, and the super crater. They're just totally iconic features of this landscape.
So geography also created some insane challenges. Imagine you're a trader trying to get expensive spices from Arabia to the port at Gaza. You had to take your caravan up the treacherous ascent of the Scorpions. And yeah, it's as intense as it sounds. It's this steep, winding pass that hauls you from way below sea level up into the Negev highlands. If you controlled that pass, you controlled the money.
Okay, so what about the cities? Well, in the Negev, a city wasn't just a place to live. You couldn't afford that luxury. Every single settlement had to be a strategic fortress, an administrative center, and a critical hub for controlling both water and trade.
Right in the center of that bow tie is Beersheba. Its name literally means well of the oath or well of the seven. And this comes straight out of the biblical stories where figures like Abraham and Isaac had to make these super serious treaties, oaths, just to decide who had rights to the wells. Because out here, water rights were everything.
Now get this. Archaeologists in Beersheba found something stunning. This big, four-horned altar, a major religious object. But it wasn't in a temple. It was found smashed to bits and literally used as building material in a regular old wall. The theory? This is physical evidence of King Josiah's religious reforms, when he tried to centralize all worship in Jerusalem and sent his guys out to destroy any rival shrines.
Heading a bit east, we find another mystery at the fortress of Arad. Inside this Israelite military outpost, excavators found something they were not expecting at all, a small, totally complete temple, basically built as a pocket-sized mirror of the Great Temple in Jerusalem.
And here's where it gets really fascinating. Inside the temple's most sacred room, its Holy of Holies, they found evidence for not one, but two standing stones. This, plus some inscriptions found nearby that mention Yahweh and his Asherah, a possible female goddess partner. It just raises these incredible questions about what kind of worship was really going on out here on the frontier.
And finally, you've got Ziklag. This is where David, before he was the famous king, was working as a vassal for a Philistine king. One scholar had the perfect name for him, the Sheriff of the Negev. I love that. He wasn't just hiding out. He was managing trade, protecting the local clans from raids, and playing a really, really clever political game.
All right, let's push even further south into the vast triangle of the Sinai Peninsula. Now, it's so important to understand that Sinai isn't just one big monolithic desert. No, it's really a land with 4 very distinct faces.
So Sinai basically breaks down into 4 zones. In the north, you have sand dunes, where the main coastal highway ran. Below that, you get the foothills with another big route. Then you hit the Efi Wilderness, a huge, barren limestone plateau, pretty much just home to vipers and scorpions. And finally, in the deep south, you reach this rugged, isolated core of ancient granite mountains. And it's in that remote southern core that we reach the climax of our entire journey. This is the traditional location of Mount Sinai, a place that wasn't just some stop on the road. It was a destination, a place for forging a national identity.
Now, scholars have proposed at least 11 different spots for the biblical Mount Sinai, but honestly, its precise GPS coordinate is way less important than its character. And the traditional site, deep in those isolating granite mountains, it just makes perfect sense for what needed to happen there.
And this is the key takeaway. Right here, this ragtag group of former slaves is led into one of the most remote, difficult places you can imagine. Why? The answer is isolation. Here, far away from the influence of Egypt or any other big power, in the heart of this formidable wilderness, this is where they could be transformed from just a crowd into a covenanted people, with a shared law and a shared identity.
So we end up right back where we began. We've seen how geography can dictate water, trade, and power. But the journey through the Negev and Sinai, it suggests something so much more profound. It poses this final big question. If the landscape truly shapes a people, then what is it exactly that a wilderness creates?